first talk in the business check. So we've heard a lot about AI already. It seems to me AI is inevitable now. But let's dive a little bit deeper into it with our next talk. This is by Ajay, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Brilio Technologies and the co-author of Effective Platform Engineering. So he'll be talking about human-centric AI agents. He's also told me yesterday, or before even, that he's run marathons on 5 continents already and is eagerly planning the last 2 continents. I guess one of them is Antarctica, so he'll be running with the penguins. Great, so everyone please help me welcome Ajay.
Thank you, Leanne. Good morning, everyone. So I'm glad that you're all here. So what an exciting keynote, right? I mean, we heard the vision of what's actually going to happen here in the platform engineering space. How is AI going to impact? So over the next 35 minutes, one thing I would like you all to do is to imagine. Imagine that you are all the decision makers within your organizations, thinking about platform engineering. You are the practitioners who are building some of those platform engineering capabilities. You are the product managers thinking about how to actually get the right kind of requirements in. So you think about all of that. Now, also imagine the fact that maybe this is true for you, but maybe imagine the fact that perhaps as part of doing all of this, you are still struggling to get people to use what you're building. And this is true if you are a product company, if you're building products, and it's true if you are building something internally within your organization. So imagine that, and how are you actually going to solve that problem? So over the next few minutes, the 30 minutes, we are actually going to be talking about, my co-author of this particular paper and this particular talk, Anumod, is not here today, as you can see, but he sends his wishes. But let's actually dive in and understand how this is actually going to change. So there's no suspense here. What we are really talking about is that how do we actually bring AI? A lot of the things that Julio and everybody has been talking about today is to see how do we actually bring AI into the picture where we can actually try and change that adoption equation far better than what it is today. So these are the QA sessions. If you have any Q&A that you have, definitely scan this and put your questions there. So let's jump right in. So there are 4 things I want to cover today, right? So start with, we'll talk about what's that shifting developer landscape? So the developer landscape for the past several years with the advent of platform engineering as well as more of those developer experience side of things has been something, and over the past 12 to 18 months, this has drastically changed. If you haven't seen it, you're going to be seeing it, but we are seeing it at Brilio, and I'm sure this is something that we all, again, if you go around and talk today, I'm sure that a lot of your colleagues will actually share this. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is how are we actually going to solve that problem? When this developer landscape is changing, how is that actually going to be addressed? Now, how are you actually going to address those problems? Then we'll get into some of the use cases. We probably don't have time to do deep dive into some of the use cases. So we'll talk about some of the use cases that we are building with Mia and some of platforms like that. And then we'll conclude by talking about some of those adoption patterns. And again, this is the big issue that we're trying to solve, right? You built everything correctly, and it's still not getting used. So how is this actually going to change? So let's start with the shifting developer landscape. So the first thing to think about here is the fact that augmenting platform engineering with AI, that is the way to do it, right? Because we have been thinking about all kinds of self-service platforms, self-healing platforms. Now we are really going to be talking about the next frontier, which is self-evolving. So that self-evolving platforms are going to really come out of this fact that we are going to infuse platform engineering with AI that sort of improves your developer experience. So ultimately, that is the goal. So over the coffee break, I was talking to some of you regarding how do we actually cross that chasm? How do we make sure that the decision makers feel that this is the right thing to invest in? That is by putting the right kind of measurements around developer experience and make sure that that improves. So what has changed? So until about the advent of but more of the agentic side of things. But again, even the past 18 months with the Gen AI improvements, one of the things that we have seen is that developers used to be those operators, right? I mean, so if you are a platform engineer, if you're a platform engineering team, you are building those capabilities. And those capabilities are actually getting used by the engineers or the developers. So they are the consumers of what you're producing. As you do that, you think of their role as more of those operators, right? They are operating what is actually needed to actually get their job done. But what we are seeing right now is that there's a paradigm shift from being an operator to being the supervisor of those activities. And this is not so unlike, this is no, the rocket science, right? So this morning, Leanne was talking about me running. So this morning I went out for a run and I was listening to a podcast. So one area, one industry where this has happened for so many years is airline industry. You know how planes are being flown today, right? There is very little kind of operator activities from the pilots. There is significant amount of autonomous activity happening there. So this is not so far-fetched if you think about it as to how this is actually going to transform the way we do engineering and development. So what are the specific aspects of it? Number one, going from that reactive mode to a proactive mode, right? This is huge because you are not really waiting for, you as a developer are not waiting for something to happen to say that, okay, this is my problem, let me go fix that. As opposed to that, you're going to be more reactive you're going to be more proactive as to how this is done. The second thing is that going from more generic to personalization. So this is something that I'm sure you all are hearing about it all day, every day, right? Whenever we talk about Copilot, whenever we talk about any of the AI assistants, one of the things that the first thing that comes to mind is like, how are your junior developers using AI compared to your senior developers using AI? How are your architects using AI? How are your product managers using AI? Now, the question is like, as a platform engineering team or as a platform engineer or providing these tools, are you providing tools that are going to work for everybody? In my experience, what we typically build as a technical product manager goes and talks to the consuming teams, you get a set of requirements, so you prioritize and provide that. So the capabilities that you provide is still not addressing that cognitive load of the developers depending on their level of experience. I hope you see that nuance there. So what happens here is that by personalizing this, it becomes far more interesting for everybody to really see that, am I getting exactly what I should be getting based on my experience, based on my understanding of how things work? So that's the thing. And the third one is the most obvious one. You're going from that inferred way of doing things to more of those autonomous ways of creating that. Now, I would love for you to pull out your phones if you can, and just tell me a little bit more about where are you seeing the most friction in your current workflows, right? So if you can scan that, and we'll give it a couple of seconds. And this could be anywhere within your ecosystem, right? It doesn't have to be platform engineering specific. There are some questions there you can see that'll tell you where are those challenges that you see there. So if you can actually scan that, and can we have a quick look at the results in the interest of time? How's that coming along? I think we are on the wrong question. We might want to go to the first. Okay, yeah, this is no. Okay, this is correct. Okay, all right. So this is great data, right? All right. I'm trying to see if we can get back to the results. All right. So. Is there a way we can look at the results one more time? All right, so we'll come back to that in a little bit. But again, what's really happening just to... All right, so I think we're having some technical problems. So do we want to actually skip that and go back to the slides? We can. Okay, this is good. All right, so let's move on. So this is something that just to recalibrate what we are talking about, right? The old developer workflows used to be more reactive and manual, whereas these new ones are going to be more proactive and automated. So that is that takeaway here. But having said that, I really want you to sort of internalize this idea of self-evolving, right? Because as we have been building engineering platforms, the whole conversation has always been around how do we make it more self-serve? And now that conversation has become a lot more about how do we make it a lot more self-evolving? And again, just to recalibrate these things, I'm sure you're all familiar with this concept. And Brian Oliver, who's here today, and myself, we actually wrote a book recently, and we are talking about this in quite a detail within the book. But just to sort of recalibrate what we are talking about, platform engineering sort of sits in the middle of all these concepts that we are talking about, right? We are talking about developer experience, and we are talking about SRE, and we've been talking about DevOps. So where does platform engineering fit into this whole equation? So it's funny that even in 2025, we keep hearing about like, oh, is platform engineering replacing DevOps? Is this the new fad that is doing it? I think we should have well passed all those conversations, but those things still happen, which is the reason why we should probably internalizing what this is, right? I mean, so essentially DevX required platform engineering, and it sort of supports SRE, and it sort of enables that DevOps, if you look at DevOps as a culture, right? So I think keeping this in mind, moving ahead, what has happened? How has these things been evolving? So in the early days, when we have been thinking about those platform maturity evolution, what we ended up doing was that this idea of manual and reactive ops, right? We wanted to fix that, say, can we create some automation to do that? So we started creating those scripted automation. And those things we called as DevOps, or we called it any kind of ops or automation and all that. Then slowly things started getting a little bit more mature, and they started thinking about, okay, are these more of event-driven ops that we want to try and do? Can we start a lot more of those intelligent orchestration? This is where platforms like Mia platform would come in, right? I mean, can we do more of those intelligent automation? So that has now evolved, and that maturity evolution has really come into this place where you're now talking about those self-evolving agentic platforms. So that's been that journey that we have been through, and I'm sure you all have been part of that. So let's see, why do we need something different here? And so one thing that I try to do is to sort of map your developer cognitive load and the solution complexity in a four quadrant ways of doing it, right? So here, the most interesting part here is that the things that is like the highly complex solutions that actually reduces the developer cognitive load the least amount are those, what we call as those unaddressed developer pain points. I mean, so these are things like we have too many tools and technologies and troubleshooting logs and stuff. So there are a lot of things happening in that space. And I don't know if any organization has completely solved this problem, because no matter what you do, that problem continues to exist. And that's one of the reasons why you see this in the top left. The other one on the bottom left is again the removing friction points part of it. Right? This is where you try and get into things like the permissions and the ticket ops activities and all that. Even in organizations where I see some significant levels of platform maturity, you still see some of those ticket ops activities, because you say, oh, I can't talk to that legal team, or I can't talk to the compliance team. For that, I need to have these tickets, right? So you still see that there is a set of problems there. But the most interesting aspect here is, again, look at the top right, that agent-human collaboration. This is where that whole paradigm shift is happening. And if you had asked me like 3 months back, Julia, I would have said that common standards would have been a problem too. But with MCP out there and A2A and all those things out there, that has become less of that problem. So I think that's why that solution complexity has dropped on those ones. But the rest of the talk, we will actually talk about that agent-human collaboration here. And again, a simple way to look at this, simple way to understand this is to sort of map it to the developer journey, right? This is no rocket science, and as part of doing any kind of developer journey mapping, you do something similar to this. But really look at that and see where are you seeing some of those problems across the board. So now let's get into those, what are these, agentic platforms that we are talking about? So if you really start thinking about it, there are 4 key areas that you can really try and map these capabilities to, right? The first one is what we call as those developer touch points. Where are the developers interacting with the system, right? I mean, it could be your IDEs, it could be a developer portals, it could be a CLI, it could be any of that, right? And I'm sure you can come up with a more comprehensive list, but these are typically the most important ones that people look at. The second thing is what we call as those platform orchestrators. And Mia platform is a great example, and some of them you might be using things like Human-Centric or like Cradix or other tools like that. But those platform orchestrators are something that's an area where we could be infusing some of these AI capabilities. Data flywheels, this is huge, right? Because we collect significant amount of data across the board. You have your observability tools, you have your ServiceNow, you have all kinds of systems within your ecosystem where you're generating a lot of data. And should we be thinking about, is there a way in which we can sort of infuse AI into that to make it more meaningful? And the guardrails, and I think Julius touched upon this in his keynote too. So we're talking about like how can you actually bring in some of those guardrails into this picture from the point of view of compliance and explainability. So the key tenets as we really build this solution would be like observability first. We already talked about it, and that is one of the key principles of platform engineering, as we all know by now. And it has to be developer first, no matter like how complex or fundamental your solutions are or fantastic your solutions are. It doesn't matter as long as you can add value for your developers. Then making sure that there's significant amount of collaboration happening, right? So you are building some of those agents. So you infused AI, you build some autonomous agents that can go solve some of these problems. But can you actually make these agents work together as opposed to making it all work in a disparate way? So that is the third one. But again, the significantly most important part of this one continues to be that human in the loop. Now I'll talk a little bit about this, right? Because going back to that example I gave about how pilots actually do this today, and fly the planes today, none of you really want to be, how much ever sophisticated the systems are. I don't think any of you, I don't want to be in an airplane where there's no pilot, right? So obviously you need to have that human in the loop. So similar kind of an example, and I'll tell you why that is the case. So again, let's try this one more time, see if this is going to work. So as you're really trying to think about AI within your organizations, how is that actually being impacted? So how are you actually seeing that readiness level of adoption, right? So this is important because if you're not prepared to actually get there, you're not in a position to actually get to the right kind of solutions, right? So I see that significant number of people are actively exploring the use cases, and many of you have really started piloting some of these things, which is awesome because again, doing it with IDE plugins, which is obviously the best way to do it, right? Copilot being the greatest example. But again, I also see that there are some of you who are aware but not yet prioritizing this, right? I think it's time for you to do that if you have not done it. Do not think that this is a fad that's going to pass. This is something that is there to stay. This is the way we will be doing business in the future. So it'll be good for you to really see that this is exactly the way the work would evolve over time. I love the fact that the 12% of you already have like autonomous agents in production. This is phenomenal, right? Because that is where we are really going to go. And I would love to talk to some of you who are actually having that to see how is that working out for you. Let's move on from this. All right. Okay, so we talked about the approach that we need to have for agents here. The second step in the whole process. Now let's look at some kind of a reference architecture, right? So this reference architecture, in my mind, has got at least 4 different planes. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. To start with, what we are talking about is having some kind of a developer zone. This is what we are all familiar with. We'll have your developer portals and IDEs like we spoke about, and some of you have already been instrumenting that. I hope everything is okay. Hopefully it's not any evacuation. All right, so the second thing is the platform zone, where we are really looking at things like your observability and your runtime and orchestration. We are talking about your Kubernetes and things like that, your CI/CD and cloud infrastructure and all those things. Pretty much everything that you think about when you talk about platform engineering sort of fits into that. And the data zone at the bottom is something that you are dealing with. Your source code, your Jira, your documentation, and all the information that you have, the data part of it is there. So where would you put in the AI infusion? That sort of happens between that platform zone and the data zone. So that is where that AI infusion sort of happens. So this is where you will think about your agentic approaches, your MCPs, again, context-sensitive RAGs within your organization, all those things sort of fit in there. And this is, I know, it's a fairly busy slide. We probably don't have a lot of time to go into it, but I just wanted to give you a quick view of how we are thinking about creating this framework, right? And we have implemented this framework, and we've had a fair amount of success. But as you can see, the interaction that you have from the developers is going to be more from that co-pilots and developer portals. I mean, this is typically the way it is. Obviously, when I say co-pilots, I'm assuming that it's sort of working together with your IDEs. But on the platform engineer side of things, their interaction is mostly with those internal developer platforms themselves, right? But as you go through this agentic framework, again, if it looks very complicated, don't worry too much about it. That's why I sort of put a box around it. You will have things like your GenAI API layer, your agent layer, your RAG layer, and MLOps layer, and the model layer, right? I mean, so you have all the essential components of building these things. So as you can, and you can also see how the MCP servers can actually work with the data here. The main takeaway from this slide I want you to have is not about every specific details about it, but acknowledge the fact that this is not simple. Building a proper agentic framework is not simple, right? So one of the things that you want to be looking at are platforms that actually provide some of these things out of the box, so that you don't have to go build some of these things, right? And MIA platform provides a lot of those options. But again, this actually makes things a little bit more complicated in the sense that if you understand that all these components have to be built, where is your contribution versus where is the third-party contribution? For example, if you have to build your own RAGs, if you have to actually train your own models on that, how complex is that going to be? So those are the kind of things that you would really want to educate yourself on and really read upon and talk to the people who can actually help you with some of those things. But the end of the day, having this framework well understood and having the right kind of visibility into that is going to make the whole process far more simpler. Now, let's say we have this framework in place. We have actually built these solutions. So how do you actually get this deployed? So that's where you're really going to be going back to that journey, that overall developer journey that we spoke about earlier, right? This journey still has the classical steps of like identifying your friction points, finding out where you're actually going to be doing the agentic approach, then creating that human interface, and then orchestration, and then continuing to do that process. But here, one thing that you might find amusing is that a lot of these are things that we have been doing in the past. Again, if you look at the color coding, that you can see that what I've really done is that I've taken an older user journey around some of these things, translated that, and infused the places where we could actually put AI. So this way, if you actually think about it this way, the beauty of it is that you're not sort of reinventing the wheel, right? Because you have a wheel, you have actually taken pains to make sure that this is well understood across the board. Now that it's well understood across the board, now let's actually try and make the tweaks there so that it becomes an evolutionary approach to deploying this. And the implementation method is fairly straightforward. You start with benchmarking and having the right kind of KPIs, right? So as I said at the beginning, having the right kind of DevX metrics is going to make this whole thing different, right? So you're going to have the right metrics. So it's not about the tools. It's not about a DevX tool or any tools that you use. It's about having the right kind of metrics. Establish those metrics, then map the developer value streams like we just looked at, then spot those agentic opportunities. So what are those opportunities to do? You're never going to get this completely right? You're always going to be thinking, if you're going to talk to your colleague or a friend saying that, hey, is that the right kind of agent should I be building? You're asking the wrong question, because what you should be doing is looking at the data, see where the friction points are, and then decide on that. Then try and remap your developer value stream mapping with some of those AI collaborations. So recently, I did that for an organization where the typical value stream mapping without using an engineering platform was about 70 days or something. So by applying platform engineering principles, we were able to bring that down to about 25 to 30 days. But with the set of agents, that literally came down to 4 days. So imagine that, right? Imagine the amount of data and the support that you get by doing an exact VSM around that. So once you do that, establish that framework that we just looked at, and then monitor the metrics and continue the whole process. So let's look at some of the agent patterns in action. By this, what I mean is like, what are the kind of things that we have built, right? So I'm quickly going to go through the use cases here. So we're going to talk about 3 or 4 of them. So the first thing that we had was this anomaly detection agent, right? So what we are trying to do here is that trying to see like what are the how do you actually do the log analytics and self-detection and pipeline healing? If you have a problem with the pipeline, can you actually do that in a autonomous manner without having that direct human intervention? And the approach that we took was that we had some RAG-based troubleshooting because there are a lot of the pipeline problems were like contextual to the organization, and then had those event-driven agents, and it led to reduction in your MTTR. Second one that we looked at was more of the deployment orchestrators, right? I mean, so here what happened is that your auto-generated CI/CD workflows, had issues. So it basically had to be regenerated from intents, whatever intent that you have. Then the solution was more along the lines of how do you do that intent recognition and then create those declarative pipeline generation. So I think that process made it significantly improved deployment frequency and lead time for changes from DORA metrics. The third thing that we did was around adaptive resource optimization. I'm sure this is a classic problem for anybody who's using any kind of cloud resources. So essentially, the challenge was that how do you actually do that resource tuning and the cost management? And this was mostly an observability-driven optimization loop with the right kind of agents in it, and led to that cost optimization part of it. And the last thing I want to talk about is like that the challenge where we had those AI assistance maximizer agents, right? And so the idea with this one was, when you are submitting a PR or something like that, this is actually taking more time. And again, classic problem all of us have, right? So what we ended up doing was created that IDE plugins for PRs, and there are so many different options today if you're using Cursor, Windsurf, and all that kind of things. I'm sure you use a lot of these things. And then, create some of those best practice suggestions around that. Then the solution was that make sure that your embedded knowledge graph is in play, meaning like what you are actually generating from your context of what's happening in your organization is in play, and then create that contextual retrieval in IDE. And obviously, this led to a significant improvement in the way in which the skills of the team could be enhanced, right? Because they were able to really now be coached as to what is the right way to do it versus not. So one last poll here. So essentially, what we are asking is the agent capability. What agent capability would improve your team's developer experience, right? I just wanted to get a feel for, so I showed you some of the things that we are doing, but what are you doing? What are the kind of things that you would love to see, right? I'm glad to see the vibe coding there. Can I maybe get a show of hands to see like how many of you are literally doing vibe coding the way you define it? I see a few hands. Awesome. More people are typing. Yeah, so I think documentation writer is great, because this is something that we hear all the time. One of the things that I recently heard was people wanting to sort of change all the or fire all their product managers and bring in AI to actually do some of these things. So I think it's interesting. So again, a lot of very interesting data here. Moving on. All right. So the last thing that we should be talking about is the adoption part of it, right? So if we really think about the adoption, there are 4 key challenges there, right? One is like, if you're setting up a model, is that going to be accurate and is that going to be autonomous, right? That is the first one. The second one is that resistance to adoption. We talked about that earlier. So, are there people saying that I'm not still bought into this and I'm not sure whether this is going to work? Then skill gaps are, the classic problem that I'm sure everybody will have with a lot of these newer technologies coming in. And, is your compliance team, bought into that whole process? So you can really try and improve a lot of these, or 4 of these activities, essentially using some of this agentic approach. But without that human in the loop, this is really not going to work, right? So that is the key thing for you to take away here. So the future platform is really going to be that human-centric agentic approach, right? So where we are really talking about from that people-process technology side of things into those more adaptive, intelligent engineering ecosystems. And do not forget the fact that these systems will now continue to have some kind of a watcher component, an optimizer component, an explainer component, and an enabler component, right? Again, this is not, again, something new. You've been doing this as part of every system. So these things are obviously need to be there. And there are a lot of SCI tools today that are starting to show some of this data right out of the box. So last takeaway here is that the best developer tools are the ones that you don't notice because they already did their job, right? So if you want to keep in touch with us, here are our coordinates. Definitely ask questions. So we talked about our book. So there are, for the first 5 people who are going to ask questions, we will have free books for you. But for the rest of you, we will have the code that you can actually scan. You get 45% off of all the Manning products, not just our book. So if you are interested, definitely scan it. How are we doing on time?
We are late.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ajay.
Right.
Okay. Can you hear me fine? Yes, you can. So we talked about this, how to give out the books, and we were thinking maybe the first 5 people to ask questions could be getting the code, but we don't have any time for questions. So you need to find Ajay, ask him a question there, maybe form an orderly line, and there's also a code for 45% off anyway, right? Okay, thank you so much.